As I came across the Norwegian Constitution, I was surprised to learn that Norway has one of the oldest constitutions in the world. In fact, after the United States, it is the second oldest still in force. While the Polish and French constitutions were a bit earlier, they did not last very long. There is an argument to be made that San Marino was actually much earlier, but at least the Norwegians themselves do not count it. And who are we to contradict them? But besides its age, the other even bigger surprise was that if you read the constitution, you get the idea that the country takes its monarchy quite seriously, and that the King of Norway actually has incredible power and basically runs the state. This sounds strange, since Norway is by all metrics a beacon of democratic governments and progressive values. So how can a modern democracy like Norway still grant its king so much power, at least on paper? And why do its kings never use it? So let's untangle this riddle and let's find out how the political system in Norway works. The birth of Norway's constitution was overshadowed by war and destruction. In the aftermath of Napoleon's defeat in the War of the Sixth Coalition, his ally Denmark was forced to cede Norway to Sweden. However, the Norwegian people refused to be a bargaining chip and did not want to be handed over to their historical rival. They declared independence and adopted a constitution on May 17, 1814 at a place called Eidsvoll. Struggling to find any recognition or support from other nations for its independence, the new kingdom stood alone in the subsequent Swedish-Norwegian War, which it ultimately lost despite an admirable defense. Norway was forced into a personal union with Sweden, but, due to its military resistance, was able to gain the concession that it would be allowed to keep its constitution and therefore its internal sovereignty. It would take until 1905, though, for the union to be dissolved, and for Norway to finally become a truly independent state. It was also in this year that the people of Norway decided against becoming a republic, choosing instead to remain a constitutional monarchy. A new king, Haakon VII, was crowned, and the House of Glücksburg has been ruling Norway ever since. But how much power does the Norwegian king actually have? The constitution states that executive power is vested in the king. He is the head of state, and the constitution grants him a surprising number of competencies. He exercises his authority through the Council of State, whose members he himself chooses from among Norwegian citizens. He appoints a prime minister and at least 7 other members. The heir to the throne also becomes a member of the council by the age of 18, although without voting rights. The king apportions business among the members as he deems appropriate. The Council of State conducts the government in the king's name and on his behalf. Formally, he governs the state, appoints and dismisses officials, has military command, and may conclude and denounce treaties. Historical developments and evolving constitutional tradition have altered the king's role, meaning that the prime minister, as the leader of a political party enjoying electoral support, is the de facto head of government and suggests to the king the members he wants in the Council of State. Since the members of the council are appointed by the king, they do not need the support of the majority within the parliament to come to power. Parliament in Norway is called the Storting, and it resides in one of the most beautiful parliamentary buildings ever. The only way to bring down a government is by a vote of no confidence. This is called negative parliamentarism. A government is considered confirmed as long as no majority votes against it, in contrast to positive parliamentarism, where an explicit majority is needed to form a government in the first place. You might think there is no big difference, but depending on the situation, it can sometimes be more difficult to organize majorities for something compared to against something. History shows that negative parliamentarism can lead to more minority governments that are tolerated by the parliament without the opposition having been able to form a majority on its own. Even if tolerated, the government will need a majority to enact laws, which is the central function of the Storting. It has 169 members, whose term is 4 years. They are elected according to a system of proportional representation by Norwegian citizens from the age of 18. During its first session, the Storting appoints a president and 5 vice presidents, forming the presidium. Until recently, Norway used to have a bicameral system. After an election, the Storting would determine a quarter of its membership to form the Lagting, a sort of upper house or revising chamber, with the remaining 3/4 forming the Odelsting, a lower house. However, the composition of the Lagting followed that of the Odelsting, so there was very little that differentiated them, and the passage of a bill in the Lagting was mostly a formality. In February 2007, the Storting passed a constitutional amendment to repeal the division, which abolished the Lagting for the 2009 general election, thereby establishing a fully unicameral system. It is also entirely a representative system. No elements of direct democracy are intended, and the constitution is silent on referendums. However, the Storting has organized referendums on a few major issues of national importance in the past, for example about its membership in the European Union in 1972 and 1994. Although the Storting is not legally obligated to follow the results, it has usually respected the will of the people. A bill passed in the Storting can only become a law, however, if it receives royal assent, another powerful tool in the hand of the king, since it functions as a veto. If he does not expressly accept the bill, it is deemed rejected. The Storting can overcome this by passing the bill unaltered in 2 sessions after 2 separate successive elections, in which case it becomes law, even without royal assent. But this still means a stalling of the bill for several years. But again, this is a power that exists only on paper, since in practice it has not been used even once by a king since Norway became fully independent. Finally, the king also has influence on the judicial branch of government, since he is the one who appoints the judges of the Supreme Court, called Høyesterett. The judges are recommended by the Judicial Appointments Board, which in turn has its members appointed by the Council of State. Traditionally, the king will follow the advice of the Appointments Board. The Supreme Court consists of a Chief of Justice and at least 4 and no more than 21 members. The Supreme Court pronounces judgment in the final instance and is responsible for reviewing laws for their alignment with the Constitution. It can also be consulted by the Storting in preparation of legislation. The other important court in Norway is the Court of Impeachment, or Riksrett. It pronounces judgment in the first and last instance in proceedings brought by the Storting against members of the Council of State, the Supreme Court, or the Storting itself for criminal or other unlawful conduct, where they have breached their constitutional obligations. It comprises of 11 members. 6 of them are elected by the Storting, and 5 of them are the longest-serving members of the Supreme Court, including the Chief of Justice, who presides over it. While all 3 branches of government can be held accountable, the king is of course an exception. He enjoys immunity and cannot be impeached or prosecuted. The only way a king can forfeit the right to the throne is by remaining outside the country for more than 6 months without the consent of the Storting. An heir to the throne forfeits the right if they marry or accept another crown or government without the consent of both the king and the Storting. Until 1990, the succession to the throne was governed by male preference primogeniture. This meant that the male heir would always take precedence over an older female sibling. This is why the current king Harald V ascended the throne despite having 2 older sisters. However, in 1990, the law changed to absolute primogeniture, where the eldest child, regardless of gender, inherits the throne. Interestingly, King Harald's firstborn is Princess Martha Louise, born in 1971, but she will not inherit the throne. This is because the 1990 change was not retroactive, and her younger brother, Crown Prince Haakon, born in 1973, was already the declared heir. However, there's hope for those who wished for a queen on the Norwegian throne, as Crown Prince Haakon's eldest child is Princess Ingrid Alexandra, who is next in line to the throne after him. In the event that the royal line ever dies out, the power to choose a new monarch would fall to the Storting. The parliament would elect a new king or queen. Although the Constitution of Norway grants the king considerable executive powers, no monarch has ever exercised them. In practice, nearly all major governmental decisions are made by the Council of State. Traditionally, Norway's kings have confined themselves to non-partisan and representative roles without interfering in politics, a practice continued throughout the royal family's line. But there's an interesting hypothetical. If there were ever a king in Norway who was more interested in exercising his power, he would have the constitutional grant to do so. This would not even be considered a coup, since all of these powers are explicitly written in the constitution. Of course, if a monarch were to overstep their bounds against the will of the Storting, it is widely understood that the parliament could move to amend the constitution to either strip the monarchy of its powers or abolish it entirely. This is an unwritten, but very real check on the monarch's power. However, it would not be too easy to change the constitution, since it is a deliberately slow and complex process designed to ensure that any amendments have broad and sustained support. First, one Storting needs to make the proposal, but only after a following election can the next Storting decide whether or not the proposed amendment shall be adopted, and this additionally requires a 2/3 supermajority. This would potentially set serious boundaries on changing the role of the king in any way. It is interesting that the functioning of the checks and balances within Norway pretty much depends on certain powers not being exercised. All of this is of course very theoretical. Norway's constitution has stood the test of time for hundreds of years, and more than just its written document, its political culture and the humility of its kings ensure that its institutions also function outside the explicit constitutional framework. It's a fascinating 200-year-old design that proves a monarchy and a modern democracy don't have to be a contradiction after all. What do you think? Does a monarchy have a place in modern democracy? Does Norway play a dangerous game by relying on the modesty of its kings? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to support this channel. Thank you for watching and see you soon.